Welcome to Mr. Brown's Basement, a channel devoted to sharing the craft of repairing, restoring, and modifying vintage electronic gear, and other random stuff.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Phil S., but you can call me Phil, as in landfill. I'm an 800 lumen lamp, and I suffer from a condition that causes rapid and involuntary blinking. In my case, I turn on and off rapidly. Think of the energy I'm saving when I'm only working half the time. Sadly, I'm unemployed now. I will leave it to my electronic care professional, Mr. Brown, to discuss my condition.
Thanks for the segue, Phil. I'm ready to plug him in and show you what happens. To the unaided eye, Phil blinks on and off quickly and asynchronously, but you can get a better picture of what's actually going on using a digital camera. Using the rolling shutter effect, you can see that at first he's blinking more or less randomly, but then settles into a synchronous blinking rate, roughly the same as my camera. As you see, there's no rolling shutter effect on a properly operating relative of Phil's, in this case, Philomena. Upon closer examination, I noticed that Phil has developed a crack in his lower body. Over his lifetime, he must have become hot enough to make this part of his skin brittle. I'm surprised. While he did work long hours, he was never operating in an enclosed space with poor ventilation. Though I know Phil very well, this time he didn't want to open up to me, but he eventually did with significant persuasion. In this instance, I couldn't take no as an answer. Phil has only 8 LEDs that in theory should produce 100 lumens each. Contrast this with Lily Luminous in my other video, who had 48 LEDs to produce 1500 lumens, or about 32 lumens each. I was able to take off the LED printed circuit board, though it didn't come off easily. The thermal grease underneath was more like glue than grease. This piece of aluminum is both glued and wedged into the base. The complete power supply, including the driver IC, or ICs, are mounted on the printed circuit board in the body rather than sharing real estate with the LEDs. Immediately obvious is a large-ish choke or transformer and a sizable electrolytic capacitor. Without getting all the way inside, there's something very odd about that capacitor. Sorry to break the news to you, Phil. You shouldn't be able to see the aluminum can. The plastic insulating sleeve must have split. It also looks like the rubber seal at the bottom has been forced out. I would have expected to see the pressure relief vent to be bowed out, but it's not.
Look at that wire. Not even soldered or crimped on or anything. This came out of here, and there's a funny blue deposit over here next to where one of these capacitors would have been sitting. Okay, let's take a closer look. More to this than meets the eye.
The driver chip is labeled BP2832X. Closest one I can find is BP2832A. It's a buck constant current LED driver. Buck means it reduces the voltage on the output compared to the input. In this case, to about what 8 white LEDs should take in series, about 35 volts. And constant current, meaning that it allows the voltage to vary to keep the current set to the optimal amount to drive these particular LEDs. In the typical application, it uses a switching MOSFET to excite an inductor. When the MOSFET is on, it supplies power to the LEDs while inducing an electromagnetic field into the inductor. When the MOSFET suddenly turns off, the collapsing field dumps its energy into the LEDs via the high-speed Schottky diode to keep them illuminated. This happens many times each second, and the smoothing capacitor helps reduce the flicker. But this is not how Phil is wired. Let's take a little peek under the hood. Phil's parts are different compared to what's typical. The AC mains voltage is rectified and turned into approximately 140 volts DC. There's a 1 ohm resistor before the full wave bridge that serves as a fuse, just in case something really bad happens, followed by a 2 microfarad filter capacitor and a 1 millihenry choke, which would provide better voltage regulation. A voltage divider made up of 3 resistors sends about 35 volts to the driver IC. A small chip capacitor provides further filtration. The output of the driver operates the same way as the example circuit, except a large electrolytic capacitor is referenced to ground rather than the negative side of the LEDs. This, along with the chip capacitor across the output, are probably wired this way to reduce switching noise in the circuit. That capacitor, which is so important to the operation of the driver, looks like this. This capacitor was rated for 105 Celsius. Given the lack of airflow inside Phil's body, it probably should have been a higher temperature capacitor, let's say 125 C. The blue deposit found in multiple places inside of Phil's body is evidence of a catastrophic failure of this capacitor. It's not surprising then that without a working capacitor on the output, that the LEDs would be blinking on and off rapidly.
I feel like Humpty Dumpty. I can't wait for all the king's horses and the king's men. I hope Mr. Brown can put me back together again.
Don't count on it, Phil. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Don't do it for me. Do it for Phil.